To separate empirical truth from statistical noise, global science relies on a single, rigid filter, the traditional peer review pipeline. The mechanics of this system have always been dictated by human bottlenecks. Reading existing literature, drafting a manuscript, and rigorously evaluating new claims requires massive investments of time. Generative AI has rewritten those mechanics. By dropping the cost of manuscript generation to near zero, the historical limits on production have vanished. We trace this perturbation across the entire research lifecycle, from literature review to drafting, submission, editorial assessment, peer review, and publication. To map the disruption, researchers analyzed 2.1 million preprints, 28,000 review reports, and 246 million paper accesses. These numbers allow us to observe an active, ongoing fracture in the global scientific enterprise as it happens. Large language models accelerate the writing process. By doing so, they apply critical stress to the load-bearing structures of scientific validation. We begin at the first node of the pipeline, the literature review phase. A common criticism is that large language models regurgitate their training data, creating an echo chamber that reinforces existing, highly cited scientific canon while burying outlier research. To test this, researchers analyzed 246 million paper accesses on arXiv, measuring discovery patterns before and after the integration of Bing Chat's GPT-4 search. This network graph represents the baseline of traditional search. Activity clusters tightly around a narrow set of well-established, highly cited papers. Post-AI integration, discovery behavior fractures this cluster. LLM users show an 11.9% increase in accessing and citing books compared to traditional searchers. Users are also pulling from lumber literature, accessing papers an average of 0.379 years newer and discovering references with far fewer existing citations. Researchers face severe time and attention constraints when navigating the expanding universe of published work. Rather than reinforcing the canon, AI acts as a cognitive expander, allowing researchers to bypass human limits and discover the diverse, long tail of literature. Moving down the pipeline, we hit the drafting and submission nodes. Historically, non-native English speakers pay a heavy language tax. Publishing in elite Western-dominated journals requires a level of linguistic fluency that acts as a strict barrier to entry, a phenomenon known as linguisticism. To measure how AI affects this barrier, the study tracked LLM adoption in manuscripts, identifying the token distribution signatures of GPT 3.5 and comparing them against text written before 2023. The data reveals a massive baseline productivity jump across all scientific fields for authors who adopt LLM tools. These bar charts display the resulting jump in productivity. Researchers with Caucasian names at US and UK institutions experience significant gains, but the exact distribution of the spike is heavily weighted geographically. Scholars at non-Western institutions see output spikes of up to 89.3% in repositories like bioRxiv and SSRN. By lowering the cost of translation and syntax correction, the geographic market share of scientific production is rapidly shifting. This creates immediate downstream pressure. The output of thousands of newly unconstrained authors is routed directly into the narrow bottleneck of journal submissions. AI has erased the global language tax. This democratizes output, but it simultaneously floods the submission pipeline with a volume of manuscripts the system was not built to handle. That flood hits the most vulnerable bottleneck in the entire system: editorial assessment and peer review. Peer reviewers operate on a traditional implicit heuristic. They naturally correlate high linguistic complexity, meaning good syntax, a rich vocabulary, and clear structure, with rigorous underlying science. The researchers quantified this linguistic polish using the additive inverse of the Flesch reading E-score. This logistic regression graph plots writing complexity against peer review outcomes. For human written text, the upward trendline confirms the traditional heuristic. Higher linguistic complexity reliably predicts a higher probability of passing peer review. But when we map the data for LLM-assisted papers, the exact correlation completely inverts. For AI-assisted papers, higher linguistic complexity actually predicts lower scientific merit. This is not a statistical anomaly. The inversion holds true even when cross-referenced against 28,000 expert reviewer scores from the International Conference on Learning Representations. The mechanics behind this are straightforward. LLMs effortlessly generate complex, polished promotional language. This pristine syntax acts as camouflage, masking weak data and flawed methodology. Journal editors now face an impossible dilemma. They must manage an accelerating flood of submissions, but the rapid screening tools they have relied on for decades are suddenly returning false positives. Zero marginal cost generation has destroyed the efficacy of the primary editorial heuristic. Traditional signals of scientific quality are now obsolete. We can now view the entire scientific publication pipeline under the simultaneous stress of these perturbations. AI has successfully expanded literature discovery and leveled the geographic playing field for global output. But because human editors are operating on shattered heuristics, the validation mechanisms are buckling under the increased load. If language no longer signals quality, overwhelmed reviewers will revert to the next available shortcut, relying solely on institutional pedigree. Relying on pedigree directly counteracts the democratizing, globalizing effect that AI enabled in the drafting phase. It locks non-Western scholars out of the very system they just gained access to. The scientific ecosystem must evolve to process this volume without sacrificing empirical rigor. Journals will need to deploy specialized reviewer agents, AI systems explicitly programmed to verify claims, check methodology, and flag data inconsistencies at scale. The only way to manage a scale-driven disruption is by fighting scale with scale. Editors, researchers, and funding agencies must accept that the old heuristics are dead and adapt their assessment frameworks immediately. The peer review pipeline is broken in its traditional form. The future of empirical truth depends